The extraordinary variety of plants and animals on Earth make our planet unique. In its harmony and balance, the spectacle of nature is born of an age-old evolution that has endured almost as long as the Earth itself. To date, scientists have discovered nearly 2 million species. But this represents only 15% of life on Earth. Huge swaths of this planet's biodiversity are completely unknown, especially in our forests and oceans. Biodiversity produces oxygen, provides food for plants and animals, and helps to purify the soil and water. Our forests and oceans play an essential role in regulating climate, allowing billions of organisms to celebrate life on Earth. But this fragile balance is threatened.
Our lives depend on biological diversity. Species and ecosystems are disappearing at an unsustainable rate. We humans are the cause. We stand to lose a wide variety of environmental goods and services that we take for granted.
Researchers believe that the Earth is undergoing one of the most significant mass extinction events in its history, caused by our civilization. Our expansion is affecting the ecosystems of all other species.
We are changing our world, and species are disappearing.
As humans, we can have a drastic effect on this planet. We can't just do things and not think about the long-term consequences.
It's a serious issue. We need to change minds and change attitudes towards nature.
Human impact on biodiversity has greatly increased since the start of the Industrial Revolution during the 18th century. Massive technological and economic development have driven the expansion of our civilization across the planet. The Earth's population has grown from 700 million to 7 billion in less than 300 years. Worldwide, humanity has become a phenomenal force. Greenhouse gas levels have not been this high for over 1 million years. We have stripped large predators of their territories by confining them to reserves or by destroying the world's large forests. All over the Earth, plants and animals are increasingly struggling to coexist with humanity. Every day, nearly 130 species go extinct, probably one of the highest rates of extinction the Earth has ever seen. For several years, the oceanographic schooner Sedna 4 has been sailing the world's oceans. After expeditions in the Arctic and Antarctic, its crew has now embarked on a 3-year voyage around the world. During their mission, 1,000 days for the planet, they will meet with scientists who have dedicated their lives to protecting biodiversity. Mission leader, Jean Lemire.
We set sail for Central America, a region with one of the highest diversity of species in the world. The preservation of habitats here is vital to the survival of thousands of species of fish, reptiles, and mammals. Here, the many shapes and bright colors of biodiversity stimulate our desire to protect them even more.
In Costa Rica, the team sets off in search of one of the last big cats of the Americas. These top predators in the food chain help control populations in their ecosystems. Scientists call the jaguar an umbrella species. By protecting it, the balance among all the other species that share its habitat is also protected. Unfortunately, the jaguar is threatened. Humans hunt its prey, and farms, ranches, and ever-expanding urbanization are fragmenting its territory. In less than a century, the jaguar's habitat has been cut in half. Today, it is confined to pockets of land that are becoming smaller and smaller. Maintaining connections among these pockets of land is essential to the genetic health of the species, because jaguars are part of a single extended family that stretches from Mexico to Argentina. In eastern Costa Rica, a reserve has been created to protect one of the jaguar's habitats. This is a private reserve that regularly attracts scientists such as biologist Jose Gonzalez and Jan Schipper. They have dedicated their lives to protecting these big cats.
Nice spot.
Yeah. Ah, look at there, look at there.
Oh, yeah.
Those are jaguar marks.
Wow, even there.
All the way up.
So that's a good spot for jaguar.
This is a perfect spot. Yeah. This is the place we're shooting.
A jaguar has marked its territory by scratching a tree.
Get sunlight direct to it, and then the lock.
Installing a motion sensing camera will record the passage of jaguars and photo ID them. Using photographs over several years, researchers have shown that the reserve is frequented by about 14 jaguars. And videos highlight the problem of jaguars coexisting with local farmers.
Oh, look at that.
What's this?
That's definitely a cow, and that looks like Cora.
Yeah, that's Cora, for sure. That's amazing.
That's amazing. Oh, see the power in his jaws?
Wow.
Wow.
With the strength of the animal.
Yeah. So I suppose that, you know, when a jaguar cut a cow like this, it brings lots of conflict.
Yeah, because that's the basis for conflict, people hunting jaguars in revenge. But on the other side, it is also a consequence of problems because people is hunting the prey base. So that's why they go out and hunt cattle, because they don't have anything else to eat.
Jaguars are more and more threatened because the increased conversion of virgin forest into livestock pasture reduces the prey available to them. The reserve has an area of about 100 square kilometers, which is not enough to support the jaguar population. Today, the reserve is bordered by a nearly continuous succession of pastures and cattle farms. The jaguars find it difficult to move among the isolated pockets of forest.
You can see there's only little patches here and there of forest with agriculture, clear-cut areas for cattle and so forth. Pastures obviously has very little value in terms of a jaguar being able to cross. So we don't necessarily need continuous virgin forest from here to the coast. We just need a mix of forest types along with different types of more sustainable agriculture to connect it. And that's a lot easier to sell that to landowners instead of saying, oh, we need to take your land away and put it in conservation.
The challenge for scientists is to protect the jaguars when they leave the reserve's boundaries. To do so, they must establish migration corridors. In this way, they hope to convince farmers to preserve sections of forest on their land that allow the big cats and their prey to move about their territory. But first, they must capture one.
So we use some pheromones to attract the animals.
By equipping a jaguar with a tracking collar, the scientists will be able to precisely monitor its movements.
And this is the trap. So it has a little mechanism like right in the bottom. We're gonna check it right now just to see if it's working fine. If jaguars disappear, what we're gonna see is just overabundance of many other species, probably changing entirely what we know as biodiversity right now. So it's a huge change that is gonna occur. That probably also works when you don't have sharks in the sea. The entire community changes.
Large predators are threatened all over the world, both on land and in the ocean. In recent decades, populations of sharks, tuna, and swordfish have declined by 90% around the world. During this same period, fishing intensity has increased dramatically. More and more, ecosystems are suffering the consequences of this overexploitation. In the coral reefs of the Caribbean, large predators are increasingly rare, which has weakened ecosystems and opened up a niche for an invasive species. The lionfish. Biologist Tim Pusak of the University of Oregon has studied this phenomenon for many years.
So lionfish that naturally live in the Indo-Pacific have been taken from their home by humans, brought over to the US because people like to have them in their aquariums. They're beautiful, stunning fish. It's great to look at them. The problem is they like to eat, and they like to eat a lot. So they'll tend to eat all the other fish that are in the aquarium, and so people just release it into the ocean.
Lionfish have begun to proliferate in Caribbean waters. Genetic studies show that the population began with only 6 individuals. Scientists are now studying the consequences of their presence in the food chain.
It appears that they can eat prey items that are up to about half their body size, which is rather large. They eat every and anything they can get their mouth on. Studies have found that a single lionfish could reduce the number of small coral reef fish by about 90%, so they're having a drastic effect, much greater than any native fish would have.
The smaller fish eaten by the lionfish generally consume large amounts of algae. With no fish left to eat the algae, they proliferate to the point where they suffocate the reef. The lionfish adapted quickly to its new habitat, and this fierce predator has taken advantage of the weakened ecosystems.
Populations exploded since the 1990s and now extend throughout the Caribbean, into the Gulf of Mexico, up the eastern seaboard of the US, and working their way down the coast of South America.
The remarkable adaptation of this invasive species to its new environment, combined with the overfishing of large fish, has weakened the health of coral reefs in the Caribbean. Panama has not been spared the influx of invasive species, which are weakening some of the world's richest ecosystems. These ecosystems are home to nearly 50% of the world's amphibian species. Frogs occupy one of the most important niches in the food chain. They consume large amounts of harmful insects and serve as food themselves for many species of reptiles, birds, and fish. In the field of medicine, they have also led to the development of antibiotics and are important in cancer research. Over the past 250 million years, they have withstood many catastrophes affecting life on Earth. But today, frogs are in trouble. A mysterious disease is attacking them where their numbers are highest. To make matters worse, these frogs are also weakened by insecticides and habitat loss. In just a few years, over 100 species have gone extinct. A few years ago, biologist Edgardo Griffith used to come to this river to study frogs.
I used to find 56 species of frogs around this stream alone. And now can't hear anything, really, you know.
The cause of this sharp decline? An invasive species. A mysterious fungus called chytrid has invaded the rivers of Panama's mountains.
The fungus arrived in 2005, killed 90% of the amphibian community, in some cases 100% of the individuals of certain species. Came, kill, stay, and at the same time it's moving eastward, but it's also coming up from South America.
Found in Mexico as early as 1972, the disease spread to Central America. Other infection sites have been found all over the world. Today, over a third of the world's 6,000 known amphibian species are threatened with extinction.
To me, I used to be a field biologist. Now I think I'm like an extinction biologist.
For scientists, time is running out. Edgardo and his colleagues are trying to capture living frogs in the hopes of learning more about the disease. They organize regular searches in Panama's rivers. Chytrid is spreading at a rate of over 30 kilometers per year. Scientists are trying to understand how it spreads from region to region. When a species nears extinction in nature, scientists often have no other choice but to remove the few survivors from the wild.
Right here. This one might be one of the species that we need to focus more into it and see why they survive, you know.
The last remaining individuals of many frog species are today conserved in sterilized containers, isolated from the outside world, where the dangerous fungus threatens their survival. Like Noah's Arks, these containers are only a fragile and temporary means to preserve the genetic heritage of dozens of amphibian species. But this is the best that scientists can do.
Some of them are not dealing with chytrid yet in their populations, but we know it's going to get there sooner or later. So we're trying to rescue as many as we can, try to breed them, try to keep them healthy. This might be the last one, so it's a huge responsibility for us.
Yeah. In the name of all the frogs dying on the jungle floor, the search continues. Long considered among the most ideal frog habitats, Panama's forests are now a real threat to their survival. Today, this unprecedented epidemic is threatening the ecological balance of ecosystems around the world. In the Cayman Islands, it's increasing human population that is harming habitats. Over half of the original environment has been destroyed.
The population of the Cayman Islands is doubling every 12 years. What that means is the footprint on the land here that's taken over by humans is doubling every 12 years.
This habitat reduction is disastrous for certain endemic species, such as the blue iguana. Found only on Grand Cayman, it is considered one of the most threatened species in the world. As the island's largest herbivore, the blue iguana eats large amounts of fruits and flowers, which helps to disperse plant seeds over large areas. This is vital for maintaining the island's delicate plant diversity.
In 2002, we did a very detailed survey, and it was the most depressing survey I've ever been involved in, because all of the places we used to see iguanas, there were none. We think realistically it was probably more like 12 left in the wild, and they weren't finding each other to breed. So the population was doomed. It was functionally extinct, as we put it, technically speaking. They were there, but there was no future.
In 2002, Frederick Burton left his job to dedicate himself to the recovery of this species. Through trial and error, he learned how to hatch baby iguanas in incubators, far from their natural predators.
When they hatch, they're tiny, they're about this long, but they grow very, very fast. And by the time they're 2 years old, they're naturally predator-proof, effectively. They get too big for the native snakes.
Oh, this is the captive facility. We have a few hundred iguanas in here.
The young iguanas are given refuge at the Grand Cayman's Royal Botanical Park. Breeding adults, responsible for the proliferation of the species, are also kept here.
They have a need for a lot of space. I mean, we found this out. Originally, when we built this facility, we thought this was all we needed. And then we discovered they needed more space. We studied them in the wild, and then we found out, whoa, an animal like this would probably have a territory of maybe an acre or something like that. We have the 2-year-olds that we're going to put out. So Jean, these are the cages where we have the 2-year-old iguanas, the ones that we're getting ready to release into the wild.
It is now time for these young iguanas to take their true place in nature. But will this new captive-born generation succeed in recolonizing Grand Cayman's weakened environment?
Next one.
Nice.
So you will sleep there for tonight, right?
Yeah, they'll be hanging in the backpacks, the same backpacks we're going to take in the morning. So they'll cool down and they'll be fine, ready to go.
After years of effort, Frederick Burton convinced the government to establish 2 protected areas on the island, where he can now release his young iguanas.
So Jean, we are on the boundary now of the Collier's Wilderness Reserve. This is the protected area on our left now. It's not huge, but the island isn't big, yeah?
By protecting the reserve from the assault of development, Frederick Burton has protected more than just the iguanas, because dozens of other threatened species also live here.
We will get rid of our packs here and we'll just take the iguana in. Here you go. Here's the box. Oh yes.
Whoa.
So now he will spend all night inside this box. All night he will sleep in here, and in the morning at first light he will come out into this strange world. And the population has gone from about 12 now to about 650, 700, somewhere around there.
A human initiative saved the blue iguana from extinction. Years of effort and protection have resulted in a protected area adapted to these animals' needs. Frederick Burton now hopes that these winning conditions will allow the most threatened reptile on the planet to begin breeding in the wild again.
The perseverance of Frederick Burton is inspiring. It proves that sometimes the efforts of a few dedicated people can make up for the abuses of society.
Sometimes evolution itself can put a species at risk.
All right.
Over time, a species can become isolated on an island, like Escudo de Veraguas, off the coast of Panama. Biologist Bryson Voirin has dedicated his life to studying what some scientists believe is the rarest mammal on Earth, the pygmy three-toed sloth. These sloths live in one of the world's most productive and most useful ecosystems in terms of biodiversity, the mangrove forest.
No, that looks like mangrove. It's not. It's really shallow.
In the tropics, mangroves protect shorelines from erosion, and they provide food and shelter for many threatened species.
Oh, hey, look, it's eating. There's a sloth right there. It's a female. Yeah, she's eating a leaf. She's got it right in her mouth.
Yeah, I see it.
Oh, she's got a baby. Let's see if we're real quiet. Maybe we won't. It's one of the rarest mammals on Earth, and there's two of them right there.
The pygmy three-toed sloth is found only on the island of Escudo de Veraguas. Discovered in 2001, it was immediately classified as critically endangered. Recent studies have indicated that this sloth lives exclusively in the mangrove, making it even more vulnerable, because worldwide, mangroves are being affected by climate change and human development. At current rates, they could disappear entirely by the end of the 21st century. Bryson Voirin is concerned about the survival of pygmy sloths because studies show that there are only 63 of them. During his last expedition, he attached radio collars to 10 sloths. Bryson expects to find them in the mangrove because the animals move very little and use the natural camouflage of the mangrove to avoid predators.
Oh, wow. There he is, right there.
Right there, in the mangroves again.
Yeah, he's still in the mangrove, so he hasn't really gone anywhere in the past month or so.
In the days that follow, he finds 9 of the 10 pygmy sloths, all in the mangrove. But the team is worried because one is missing.
Sebastian.
Jean.
Hi, Jean, Sebastian.
Hi, Sebastian. Yeah, we're just at the end of the mangroves. We lost our signal a little bit. We're gonna need some help.
Okay.
In 2005, several families of fishermen took up residence on the island.
creció aquí perezosos en los bosques? ¿Sí?
Their knowledge of the area could help find the missing sloth.
It doesn't really bother.
Hay mucho. Hay mucho.
You think that the one that live in a mangrove, they live in a mangrove, but there is a lot more right behind in the jungle here.
So let's check in the forest for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Muchas gracias.
This surprising information contradicts previous studies indicating that the mangrove is the pygmy sloth's sole habitat. Bryson decides to search in one of the channels leading into the forest.
Number 5 is the one that I just don't know where he went. But he might have actually gone out of the mangroves and into the forest, which would be pretty exciting because that means that he's actually eating other things besides mangrove leaves, and he's in the interior of the island maybe. Hopefully we can find him. All right, I got him on the 900 frequency. Hear that chirping? That's the sloth. So he must be straight back that way.
Every step away from the mangrove would appear to increase the credibility of the locals. But it is also possible that Bryson will only find the collar of a poached sloth. But if the sloth is found in the forest, it would be great news for the species. In nearby Costa Rica, Jan and Jose have yet to catch a jaguar. The scientists are concerned because the animal's distribution in the reserve is well known, and the lack of any tracks is surprising. They redouble their efforts in other sectors of the reserve. Capturing such a cunning animal is a huge challenge, but it's an essential part of the research, because only through a better understanding of the jaguar's migration patterns can its living space be increased. On Grand Cayman, Frederick Burton and his blue iguanas have benefited from their protected habitat for nearly 2 years.
Joel, is the hatchling?
Yeah, that's great.
That's the first wild-born young iguana we have ever seen in this area. This is a wild iguana that has hatched here in the protected area.
So it is working.
It's working. It's
great.
Working. I think it's very interesting working on a small island because it is like a microcosm of what is going on everywhere in the world. And it's very important, I think, for people working in conservation to spend at least part of their time working on things that can succeed. It's important for personal motivation, but it's also important for the way that conservation is presented to the world. People get very tired of hearing bad news stories all the time.
The wild birth of a baby iguana is a triumph of nature. On Escudo de Veraguas, the radio signal leads Bryson Boyrin on his quest.
Yeah, you could just see her fur.
Hey, buddy. Okay. Look at that. Wow. Whew. Victoria. Hey. Whoa, you're looking big. Oh, man.
That's great.
Oh, she looks great. Look at her.
Yeah. That's great.
She looks like she's been doing very good here in the forest and not in the mangroves, so she looks very healthy.
You know, one thing I think that this shows is that even though the mangroves are being cut, that may not be as big of a risk for the pygmy sloths. because if they're able to eat other things in the forest, at least they have other food sources besides just the mangroves. So I'm pretty confident to say that there are more sloths than just 63 on Escudo. There are probably a lot more. If they're in the whole island here like this, that means the population is pretty good.
Ready to go?
All right,
Yeah,
Victoria.
back to home, sweet home.
So the locals were right. If the pygmy sloths are spread over the entire island and live in its abundant forest, scientists will have to re-examine their numbers and maybe even the status of the species. It's fantastic news for the pygmy three-toed sloth. This important discovery was the result of collaboration between scientists and the island's inhabitants. But the happiness of this day is short-lived. Not far away, a nasty surprise awaits the scientists. A green turtle, another endangered species, is trapped in the dugout of a group of poachers.
So here on the island, you know, so they're probably gonna cut it up, smoke it, and then they will cook it slowly till they finish with it. And this animal can stay at least a week before he starts to get weak.
Do they really know what they're doing?
I really think they really know what they do. The police would come around here maybe 1 or 2 times in a month, just pass around looking for drugs people, but they really don't looking to see if people killing super.
That's pretty sad to see.
It's pretty sad, you know, for me, it's because, you know, I worked 13 years protecting sea turtle with the Peter Maitland Animal and project in Cayusapatia. And my father got more than 20 years saving them, you know, trying to save them, and I do the same, you know, so it's pretty sad to see they catch it and they're gonna kill it, you know.
Poaching is yet another threat in the fight to conserve endangered species. And the problem is widespread, even in protected areas.
So?
Bad news.
Nothing?
Nothing. We checked all the traps again, where we put the extra pheromones out last night, and nothing.
No tracks, nothing.
No tracks. We actually went along a couple extra trails and checked that where there were some muddy spots from the rain that we had the other day. We haven't seen a track since you've been here.
Well, that's life, I suppose.
Yep, we're obviously very concerned about what might be causing this. Even if we have all this conservation momentum behind us, it can just take a few people to come in and maybe snare some animals, which is what we're hearing. It's depressing.
But where are Cora and the other jaguars? There are rumors that poachers have recently been operating inside the reserve, and 2 of them were even bold enough to brag of their horrible acts on social networks.
Oh my God, that's sad.
It's a catastrophe for the local population, which numbers only 14 jaguars.
How far should we go to protect threatened species? A private militia patrols the reserve every day. Around here, they don't mess around when it comes to conservation. There are rampant rumors that up to 11 jaguars have been killed in the region, possibly even within the boundaries of the reserve. Jaguar skins have been found on the black market.
It makes me sad because it's as if they were threatening members of my own family. So I don't know what we're going to do with these poachers. So much work, love, and sacrifice over so many years, only to see our jaguars killed. We're going to return to the mountain and try to find these hunters who shoot at anything that moves.
On Little Cayman, another type of hunting party is being organized. Local diving associations are mobilizing to wipe out the lionfish, the species now considered the worst poacher in the Caribbean. But the divers must keep up the hunting pressure if they are going to neutralize this invasion, because lionfish reproduce extremely quickly. This is not sustainable. So they have turned to a more natural solution. They are enlisting the help of the few groupers that live near the coastline. Little by little, they are training them to hunt the invader. Who knows whether these few fish will develop a taste for the lionfish and transmit this new feeding habit to other fish. Earth's ecosystems are today weakened and threatened by a variety of external pressures. Conservation efforts are vital, but the hard work of many can be completely undone by the greed of just a few.
Buying the turtle's freedom cost only a few dollars. A modest sum given the situation. We even wondered if we were not trying to appease our own conscience in the face of so much indifference. But this was a living symbol of nature's difficult coexistence with humanity. We just couldn't leave it there and do nothing.
I'm optimistic because I believe we can change things, and if human being realizes the importance, there's still something we can do, but we are right on the edge.
The coral reef system could be in dire straits, but we need to take efforts in order to mitigate these, and we can stop fishing larger fish and keep them on the reef, and it's important that we do it now.
I'm not really sure which species will survive and which will survive in the future, but I think life will find a way.
The lionfish invasion really highlights for me is the importance for humans to understand that they can have a drastic effect, and they need to realize what they're doing before they do it.
When you're in a forest with predators, it gives you a new respect for life. It gives you a new respect for the connectivity of all things. You actually feel like you're not on the top of the world. Maybe that's where we should begin, is to not just educate people in the classroom, but take people out of the classroom into what's left of the wilderness so that we can actually save it.
If you inspire people and educate them, I think then they'll start to care more about it and help protect it.
The troubled coexistence between humans and the different forms of life on our planet too often translates into the loss of species that play key roles in ecosystems. Perhaps we can draw inspiration from the remarkable work of scientists who dedicate their lives to preserving endangered species. Humanity has a duty to reestablish a harmonious relationship with nature, and do it soon. It is within our grasp to sustainably and harmoniously develop the Earth's resources. But time is running out if our legacy to future generations is to inspire a wave of change and a new attitude. One of respect for biodiversity and the essential harmony among all forms of life. Since life began 3.5 billion years ago, species have appeared, evolved, and vanished in step with the ebb and flow of environmental conditions. To unveil the beauty and fragility of nature, the oceanographic schooner Sedna 4 has set out on a mission, 1,000 days for the planet. Leading the expedition is Jean Lemire.
We set sail for the Galapagos Islands, true icons of the amazing biodiversity of our planet. Here, nature's spectacle has fascinated people for generations. Conservation is fundamental on the Galapagos, and the protection measures implemented here can help establish more balanced relations between humans and the other species with whom we share the globe.
Located more than 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador, these remote islands are among the most famous in the vast Pacific Ocean. But for centuries, the archipelago was known only to a few sailors who kept its existence secret. Back in the day, the islands were a larder for pirates. The local wildlife made easy pickings. They had no fear because there were no natural predators. Passing sailors introduced a number of animals, and these have multiplied. Goats, rats, and other invasive species still threaten the unique flora and fauna of these remote islands. But a new threat is looming, more insidious than tourism or even the introduction of exotic invasive species: climate change. The island's extraordinary richness is due in large part to the interplay of the great ocean currents that help regulate the climate of our planet. In this region, the Humboldt Current flows north from the Antarctic, skirting the coasts of Chile and Peru. This deep water stream, 7 or 8 degrees colder than the surrounding ocean at these latitudes, comes to the surface bringing nutrients that stimulate the growth of plant and animal plankton on which many species of fish feed. This abundance of food is a boon for many animals, like the Galapagos penguin, the most northerly species of penguin on the planet. The geographic location of the Galapagos Islands isn't an ideal habitat for penguins, but they've been able to adapt to the tropical climate thanks to the cold ocean currents that bathe the archipelago. To escape the heat, Galapagos penguins spend most of their time in the water and only return to land at sundown. But an increasingly frequent climatic anomaly is threatening the survival of these penguins endemic to the Galapagos: El Niño. Normally, the tropical trade winds blow the warm surface waters out to sea, creating a vacuum filled by the upwelling of these cold, nutrient-rich waters from the depths. In El Niño years, the trade winds weaken. The masses of warmer water that accumulate in the western part of the South Pacific travel east, blocking the upwelling of the cold ocean currents all along the coast. The coastal waters heat up even more and cannot support nutrients. The great schools of fish, such as anchovies and sardines, migrate further out to sea, leaving species that depend on them for food to go hungry. Two major El Niño events in 1982 and 1997 caused a famine among the penguins of the Galapagos. In 1982, El Niño wiped out 77% of the population. Only 463 penguins remained on the Galapagos. 15 years later, in 1997, another extreme El Niño struck hard. That year, 66% of the already diminished population starved to death from lack of food within reach of the archipelago. Today, Galapagos penguin numbers have stabilized at around 2,000 individuals. However, the high mortality rate associated with El Niño means that this weather event is a major and ongoing threat to the survival of this vulnerable species. Scientists in Galapagos Islands National Park who monitor these climate phenomena have already noted important changes within different ecosystems.
En esta época del año, las iguanas marinas empiezan a hacer su territorio, ¿no?
This is the time of year when marine iguanas start to establish their territory.
Agarrando su territorio. Normalmente,
And these guys are doing that right now.
Donde pueden tener varias hembras, si puedes ver. Y en esta época del año,
They lay out the boundary of an area within which they can control a certain number of females.
Desde los últimos 4 o 5 años, personalmente he visto
Mating season begins around the 24th, 25th, or 26th of December.
estos son como un reloj.
But for the last 4 or 5 years, they've started mating later.
Y empiezan a reproducirse.
They've always been as regular as clockwork.
Como por el mes de enero, los primeros días de enero. Y luego,
Last season, mating didn't start until the first few days of January.
También se demoró 1 o 2 semanas más. Entonces como que se fue extendiendo más el tema del tiempo, ¿no?
With mating happening later, the eggs don't start to hatch until 1 or 2 weeks later than usual. So the whole reproductive process is shifted later in the year.
Creo mucho que ver con el tema del cambio climático, con el tema del
I think climate change is a major factor in the delay in the reproductive cycle.
En Galápagos también se siente.
We're definitely feeling the effects of climate change here in the Galapagos.
La temperatura del mar se toma desde
We've been keeping track of ocean temperatures going back 70 years.
de unos 60 años que en la actualidad para el
Now
tema
that climate disruptions are a big concern, our records are proving very useful in identifying temperature spikes during El Niño
han
events.
sido los picos más altos, ¿no? Por ejemplo, cuando hay en la época del Niño. Ok, gracias. Lo importante de estos datos es que
This data is vital over the long term. In 20 or 30 years, we'll be able to determine whether or not climate change has had an impact, something that we simply couldn't do with short-term data.
en corto tiempo, ¿no? Este animal que está aquí
This animal here is a type of sea crab that originated far away from the Galapagos archipelago.
traído por una corriente cálida en una época del Niño.
They traveled on a warm current during an El Niño event.
Cangrejos en cierta época por el año
We found lots of them here in 1997 and 1998.
un evento del Niño, ¿no? Se vieron en gran abundancia.
We had never
Nunca
seen them
habían
before.
antes, en años anteriores. Insisto,
Their
son
arrival
organismos
allows us to deduce that ecosystems are affected by changes to the climate.
empezar a medir qué efectos
And this is
el cambio
proof that
climático
species
está teniendo en
change,
los ecosistemas.
ecosystems change, but also that the habitat where the animals live also undergoes profound changes.
de los sitios donde viven estas especies.
El Niño is unpredictable. The climatic anomaly appears every 2 to 7 years. But many scientists think that the frequency and severity of El Niño events could increase, even double, given the current climatic changes. This could prove fatal to several species endemic to the Galapagos, including sea lions, who depend on the nutritional bounty of the cold Antarctic current. Scientists have noted much higher mortality rates in El Niño years. During the last extreme event, numbers dropped by half.
We've observed that during El Niño events, the seals and sea lions have to go further out to sea to find food like anchovies or sardines. Nursing mothers have to leave their pups alone on shore for longer periods of time. The babies go without food for long stretches and eventually weaken and die. So it's the younger animals that are most seriously affected by these changes to the ecosystem.
At least 90% of the pups will die on the beaches of the Galapagos during extreme El Niño events. And it can take up to 10 years for the population to recover. If, as a majority of scientists think, climate change does increase the severity of El Niño as well as its frequency, the future for these animals, already listed as endangered, is more uncertain than ever. Climate disruptions have no borders and can have dire consequences spread over time and great distances. At the sub-Antarctic Bird Island in the southern Atlantic Ocean, scientists of the British Antarctic Survey noted major die-offs among young fur seals. And these events repeated over time. Years of research have shown that El Niño also takes a toll on wildlife in the Atlantic Ocean, but 2.5 years after the event begins in the Pacific. The band of warm water created by El Niño spreads down the coast of South America, rounds Cape Horn, and flows into the Atlantic, dramatically reducing marine productivity, forcing the fur seals of Bird Island to travel much further in search of food. It took 2.5 years for the warm waters to reach this island in the South Atlantic. But the result is the same. The seal pups starve. The beaches of Bird Island become cemeteries in turn, a testament to the deadly reach of El Niño. In the Galapagos, despite the most stringent conservation practices in the world, many species are under threat. The culprit? The climate crisis, which knows no borders and sneers at conservation measures. A rise in ocean temperature could also have irreparable consequences for the survival of these unique creatures. They have become true symbols of conservation. Marine iguanas, too, are affected by warming seas. Iguanas eat sea algae, which become indigestible as a result of a buildup of a toxin that grows in warm, humid weather. When there's nothing but poor quality algae to eat, and not even much of that, the iguanas are in grave danger. As well, erosion and floods destroy their nests, and the warmer air affects their ability to control their internal body temperature. In one of the most recent extreme El Niño events, almost 90% of marine iguanas died. Torrential rains that accompany El Niño can affect the giant Galapagos tortoise. Nests get flooded, and landslides trap some giant tortoises in ravines. Estimates are that over 250,000 giant tortoises once lived on different islands before the Galapagos were discovered in the 16th century. Caught and kept alive on sailing ships as a source of fresh meat, their numbers plummeted. The introduction of invasive animals like goats and rats also contributed to the decline of giant tortoises throughout the archipelago. In 1974, there were only 3,000 individuals left. But major conservation and captive breeding programs have allowed some subspecies to recover. Today, there are around 20,000 individual animals all told.
This is a male tortoise from Santa Cruz. We're 25 kilometers from the coast. That's why there are around 5,000 of this subspecies left. It's so far inland that the whalers and hunters never bothered coming to get them. These animals are an integral part of our ecosystem. The plants on the Galapagos have evolved in concert with this link of the chain. If it weren't for these tortoises, the vegetation would be completely different. We know that some of these plants even have to pass through the tortoise's digestive system to germinate. The evolution of the island is so intertwined with the tortoises that it's hard to imagine what the islands would look like if there were no tortoises.
Efforts to conserve the last giant Galapagos tortoises have saved some subspecies from extinction. But it was 1 minute to midnight when the reintroduction team arrived on the islands.
I started working with the tortoises when the park was created. At that time, we knew very little about the tortoises. How well was the population doing? Were they in good shape individually and as a species? Where did they come from? Where were they concentrated? We knew nothing about them.
Fausto Llerena is known around the world because of his special relationship with one famous tortoise, Lonesome George. George was the last living male of the Pinta Island subspecies. A bevy of genetically compatible females were introduced to the old bachelor, but in vain. People around the world were enthralled by this amazing story of survival. Today, Fausto Llerena and his team focus on protecting young tortoises for eventual reintroduction on the different islands of the archipelago.
The tortoises live here for 2 years before being released into the wild. They're still very vulnerable during that first year. The biggest danger is rats. Rats don't attack the eggs, just the baby tortoises. But the pigs eat tortoise eggs. Rats can actually eat a small tortoise like this. We've reintegrated 1,800 tortoises from our incubators on Hispaniola Island. At that time, only 15 adult tortoises were left. We brought them here to mate.
Sí, porque prácticamente se podía decir que estaba a cero porque
we had to do that
en el campo no allá en su
because they weren't reproducing in the wild.
Las hembras, los pocos individuos que habían ahí estaban dispersos en toda la isla.
The few who survived were dispersed all over the island. It was almost impossible for males and females to find each other in all that territory.
Viejas.
Now we are finding nests of young adult tortoises. There are around 3,000 today. The species has made a good recovery.
Conservation measures, captive breeding programs, and the giant tortoise's amazing longevity, up to 200 years, have enabled some subspecies to escape extinction. But other subspecies remain in danger. especially with the potential degradation of their habitats caused by climate change. We left the Galapagos feeling uncertain about the future of this paradise of biodiversity. Climate change will affect not only animals and plants over the next century. Scientists foresee that all the islands in the Pacific will face temperature increases on land and sea. Beyond the disasters feared by the predicted rise in sea level, ocean warming could affect our ability to feed the planet. To understand one of the little-known consequences of warming, we set sail for French Polynesia. Spread over 165 million square kilometers, 1/3 of the surface of the Earth, the Pacific Ocean supplies almost 60% of all the fish eaten on the planet. This extraordinary abundance is due in large part to its coral reefs, which support a wealth of diverse life forms. But over the last 30 years, scientists have noted a dramatic rise in coral die-off and an overall degradation of coral ecosystems. All over the world, coral reefs are threatened by the warming of the oceans, by their increasing acidity, and by the ever-growing pressure of humans on these fragile habitats. On the island of Moorea, scientists are working to understand the evolution of coral reefs.
In a way, it's a shame that coral reefs are coastal. Coral needs light to grow, so they have to be in shallow water, which automatically puts them close to human activity. The biggest threats are overfishing, excess sediment, drag nets, and hard objects that bump or crash into the coral reef. All those things have a negative impact.
Coral reefs form ecosystems that provide shelter and food to millions of life forms, from bacteria to algae, and from fish to the largest marine predators. Reefs are comparable to tropical forests on land because of the amazing variety of species that depend on them. Coral reefs are fundamental to life in the oceans. Degradation of corals will inevitably impact how much fish the oceans can produce. We estimate that more than 85% of fish stocks are overexploited or exploited to the maximum, and the pressure to feed humankind can only increase. Yet, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, 7 of the 10 most important varieties of fish are on the brink of complete disappearance. Globally, 1 fish species in 3 is threatened with extinction.
We've been recording ocean temperatures on Moorea for over 25 years and have noted what may seem like a slight increase of 1/4 degree Celsius. This long-term study indicates a trend, and if we're talking 1/4 degree every 25 years, that's 1 whole degree in a century. We're starting from average temperatures of 28 to 29 degrees, and 1 degree more takes us up to 30 degrees, just about the upper limit of tolerance for a coral reef. That's when bleaching starts to occur, and any additional stress could tip it over the edge. Each stress isn't disastrous in and of itself, but it's the accumulation of stressors that does the damage.
Even a small increase in temperature is highly stressful to corals. Corals react by expelling zooxanthellae, single-cell algae that live symbiotically with the coral. Without these essential algae in their tissues, the coral turn white and will eventually die of starvation. Episodes of massive coral bleaching have been observed 7 times since the middle of the 1980s on the Moorea Reef. Coral reefs are also vulnerable to attack by the crown-of-thorns starfish, or Ocanthaster. This voracious coral-eating predator has caused the percentage of living coral on the north coast of Moorea to plummet by 96%. Another blow fell in 2010, when Cyclone Oli's 7-meter-high waves heavily damaged the physical structure of the outer slopes of the reef, leaving the coral in a critical state. But the coral ecosystems of Moorea seem resilient. Doctoral candidate Caroline Dubé is studying the Moorea Reef.
On the dive, we saw a lunar landscape, indicating that the reef has been badly damaged in a series of disturbances over the last decade. We can't say for sure that the reef is recovering, but some pioneer species are starting to recolonize the substrate. So that's a good sign that things are starting to get back to normal after all the upheaval. And as we continue to observe the reef over the next few years, we should gather more evidence of the reef's chances to make a full recovery from the damage. Today we saw herbivores, carnivores, and large predators like sharks. That shows that the food chain is intact, despite the fact that the coral isn't in good shape. It proves that the ecosystem is stable and that there's a chance that it will recover over the next few years.
While the number and variety of life forms in and around the degraded coral reef has diminished considerably, there is still a wide range of species in the food chain. The arrival of large predators may be a hopeful sign for the future of this recovering ecosystem.
So he's a juvenile? How old?
He's just under a year old. He's about 60 centimeters long. Now we've got him, and we'll try to be quick, get everything done within 1 to 3 minutes. Let's go. First, a picture. That's one. Can you turn him over? What we've been doing for the past 2 years is collecting data on juveniles, subadults, and adults. And by recapturing individual animals, we can see how fast they grow. And he's a bit more, 3.6.
And the young sharks will stay here for 3 or 4 years?
That's right. They live here and eat, get bigger and stronger. Once they become subadults, when they're around a meter long, they'll start to travel more out into the lagoon and even to the other side of the reef. There, he's ready to go.
Research is vital if we want to improve our understanding of the complex universe of reefs.
Good morning.
American scientists from the University of California are studying the recovering corals near Moorea.
Good morning. How are you? Welcome on board.
They're taking advantage of setanophores' presence here to expand their exploration into harder-to-reach areas in order to compare the different rates of coral recovery.
Coral reefs are really in a very dire situation. Large amounts of coral have been lost in the last 50 years, and that loss of coral arguably began 300 years ago when European explorers first got to tropical locations. But those losses have really intensified in the last 50 years, and maybe in the 60s and 70s there are many parts of the world that had half of the seafloor covered by live coral, and now it's barely 1/10 of that. It really is very serious.
Scientists are investigating the way new coral tries to repopulate these places. What varieties are resilient? And what are the chances that someday we'll see a viable ecosystem established despite the predicted climatic stress?
So our main objective is this coral survey, and really the tool is the camera framer. So we're looking at the whole landscape, but we're taking very detailed pictures of just a 1/2 meter by a 1/2 meter. We're repeating that many times, and we'll do that at a series of depths, and from that we can then put together a detailed picture of the community structure of the corals.
These are the coin of the realm for our trade. These are photographs of the seafloor, and we have similar photographs that go back now 9 years for Moorea. And we use these photographs to measure how much of the floor of the reef is covered by live coral and how much has died.
How was it? Oh, really good. You know, it's a really interesting place. It's, I think it's been not as disturbed, or maybe it's been longer since the disturbance than over on Moorea. So we saw more corals, a little bit older corals, so you can see a lot of coral competition. Down deep, it was kind of a lot of rubble, but also a lot of juvenile corals growing in. So it's a sign that there's recruitment of new corals coming here.
This little colony down here, this is live stony coral. This is the coral that probably, it's either unhealthy or it has died recently. And all this gray stuff around here, this is reef rock colonized by algae. So only about 5% of that table is live coral, and the rest is algae and reef rock. So here is a coral colony that was eaten by crown of thorns probably within 48 hours, and here is another one. And just for the contrast, this is what they should look like when they're healthy, just a beautiful layer of tissue, and that disappears, and we have this whiteness.
Even if the result of that is white, it's very different from the bleaching problem.
Absolutely. It's a common symptom of two very different conditions. One is where the tissue is removed and you're seeing the white bones sticking up into the water column. The second one is where the corals typically are stressed physiologically, usually because the seawater is very, very warm. It causes them to lose their symbiotic algae that they feed with. Once those algae have gone, the tissue is a very thin, transparent layer for a short period of time. And it's white. It looks just like this. But the difference is, for that short period of time, they remain alive. However, without the algae, they can't feed off sunlight. So they then slowly starve. And if the water stays hot, they starve and they starve. And usually within about 2 weeks, then the tissue will die. And then we're back to this condition where whiteness is a sign of the bare bones in the water column.
If we look at the condition of coral around the world, a good 20% of the world's coral is permanently destroyed. These numbers are approximate. Then we have 50% of coral that is critically endangered, and the remaining 30% is in a relatively natural state and not under any particular negative stress for the moment.
Some scientists believe that over 60% of corals could die by the year 2060. Yet fish are the primary source of protein for over 1 billion humans.
The main problem is overfishing. And that's happening because coral reefs are located in economically disadvantaged areas where countries are poor and overpopulated. There's a population explosion in Southeast Asia, throughout the Pacific, as well as in Africa, which is increasing the already tremendous need for protein. And there's a big food warehouse on the doorstep, the lagoon. So people keep on harvesting the way they did in the old days. But whereas there used to be 2,000 fishermen, now there are 20,000. So sooner or later, the system will not be able to produce enough to meet demand. With regard to current climate changes, we know that some corals will be unable to adapt to a rise in temperature or acidity. But there are a great many varieties of coral, and some that are not dominant today could well become dominant in the future. The king will be deposed, and other species of coral will become the main builders of the ecosystem. What we don't know is what that ecosystem will be like. To say there will no longer be any coral ecosystem is going too far, in my opinion. Coral reefs have existed since the dawn of time, so it's a bit much to suggest that they'll disappear. But that they will change, that the balance of the reef system will be modified, of that much I'm sure.
Predictions on climate change include an increase in ocean temperatures. So it's crucial to understand how coral reefs will react in these new circumstances. What types of coral will best survive climate change? And how will higher levels of acidity of the oceans affect the planet's coral? Trying to paint a picture of the future is a major challenge for scientists.
This is where we've been working long hours for 6 weeks now. My graduate students and I investigating ocean acidification and climate change on corals and algae.
So what do we have here?
We have a set of tanks. They hold about 150 liters, and Some of these tanks are basically showing us what the future might look like. We're trying to create a world that will happen in about 100 years in these tanks with high carbon dioxide levels. And then we're trying to grow corals in those conditions for 6 weeks, 4 weeks to 6 weeks to see how they respond to those conditions. We've been working on that now for about 2 years, and we have a pretty good idea how much their growth rates will be reduced.
The outlook isn't promising. In very conservative simulations of the kind of warmer, more acidic ocean conditions predicted for the future, there's a marked decrease in coral growth and productivity. For fish and other organisms that depend on corals, it's not good news. Climate change, more frequent extreme climatic events like El Nino, pollution, the feared increase in natural disasters, and the degradation of coral reefs around the world are interconnected factors that threaten global food supplies.
Did you catch that today? Yes.
Will communities that depend on fish for survival be able to adapt to the expected drop in the productivity of our oceans? Urgent change is essential if we hope to reduce the pressure on our marine resources. Estimates are that more than 85% of fish stocks are currently being overfished or exploited to the limit. In other words, we're now harvesting more fish than the ocean can provide. If the trend continues, commercial fish stocks are likely to collapse by 2050.
The increase in the human population living by the sea is worrisome. As things stand today, coral reefs simply cannot produce enough to meet the protein requirements of an ever-growing number of people, so overfishing is inevitable. At some point, we're going to have to introduce measures to help the natural systems along if we want them to produce enough. We'll have to supplement them with fish farming, impose certain regulations, and introduce stringent management methods. But even if, as an example, we can get people to stop harvesting the top fish in the food chain and switch to species that are lower down, in the long run, we'll still be removing fish and weakening the system no matter what. So in my opinion, we need to find other types of management for better conservation.
On our round-the-world expedition, we've collected clear evidence of major changes in all marine ecosystems on the planet. Climate change risks reducing the ocean's productivity, but we will put more and more pressure on our oceans to feed ourselves. There will be fewer fish for the growing numbers of people who depend on them. In the long run, it's a losing proposition for the fish or for us, humans.
Back when pirates stopped at the Galapagos to catch giant tortoises, the idea of depleting resources never crossed anyone's mind. Why would it? At the time, there were only a few 100 million people on the planet. But in 35 years, we'll be up to 9.7 billion, and probably 11 billion by the end of the century. The pressure on global resources will continue to grow, crippling the planet's ecosystems and endangering all those who live in them. There's one species we won't have to worry about anymore. The Pinta Island tortoise is extinct. Lonesome George, the last living male of his subspecies, has died, wiping out millions of years of evolution in one stroke. More species are going extinct than ever before as a direct result of our unsustainable exploitation of the planet's resources. But all that could change. The fate of the planet rests in the hands of one species only, ours.